right, welcome back for week 13.
Week 13.
History, morality, and ethics at the dawn
And
of
ethics.
the 20th century.
That's right.
Red Dead Redemption 2.
Red Dead Redemption 2.
So for this week, we had chapters from When, that's on Blackboard, and Suits.
Suits.
And then we were reading Olson, Red Dead's chapter...
C. Olson.
Chapter 8 through chapter 12,
Yes.
Working through that section of the book. And then for graduate students, there's the chapter from Chalmers.
Yep, we have 2 chapters from David Chalmers.
And yeah, so for this week, I think we're going to discuss what aesthetics.
Yeah, we're thinking about the nature of games, and we will talk a little bit about the definition of a game, and then think about a couple aspects in When. We'll maybe briefly mention the Chalmers. And really, you know, the chapters from Olson should be pretty familiar to you at this point in terms of the stuff that we covered in Richardson's text and in earlier parts of the class. So we're probably not going to touch on that too heavily this week. So,
and I think if you're playing the game, you should be, hopefully you're getting to chapter 5.
Yeah.
You should be doing
near
Guarma.
the end of chapter 4, getting to chapter 5.
Yeah, and the Guarma missions, right? We won't say too much, but you end up on this fictional island called Guarma. Right. It's east, I think, if I remember right, of Cuba.
Yes, I think that's right.
Although, you know, we very much enjoy the Olson book.
Yes.
One little part that maybe is a critique, but it's sort of, you know, we should highlight it.
Absolutely.
At the very least is when he talks about, like, it's on page 6. He said, regrettably, I won't dwell much on the game's Caribbean chapter as it departs too radically from our U.S. foundation.
Yeah.
I think it actually does the opposite, because
Sure.
it is, if the game takes place in 1899,
Yeah.
you have 1898 Spanish-American War, which we worked through in the Richardson book.
Yes.
And, right, when you think of the Spanish-American War, who do you picture riding up the hill?
Yeah.
Our friend Teddy Roosevelt,
That's right. That's
who recruited
Yes.
a vast array of cowboys,
Yep.
Harvard
Statesmen.
graduate,
Yep.
state. You know, it was this almost a pressured modern version of America that he pulls together as a group, and he leads them. So he's even
leading from the front.
This really strange something from like chivalry, right? Like the king leading his troops into battle, and
has the courage of his convictions, we might say.
Yeah, and so I to me, it's, you know, it's a hugely important part of the foundation of U.S. history. Yeah. It is the extension, right? It's Monroe Doctrine,
absolutely,
from decades earlier.
Yeah.
But we should be thinking of this because the Guarma, and again, when we look at the game, and we've been thinking about aesthetics and you know, the intricacies. And we'll discuss in a bit this New York Times piece that looks at non-player characters.
That's right. Yeah.
But the Guarma chapter, which is not very long, to me, just like it shines sort of like another element of genius in the game. Like, so you're going to bring in sort of Cornwall, who is, you know, as a poster child for all these different, like,
these big monopolists, capitalists.
Yeah, but
Rockefeller
they didn't have to bring in Guarma.
That's right.
But they did. Yeah. And I think the next level of this was it Hercules or Hercules? The character that is from Haiti.
Oh, yes.
Right? The person is from Haiti. So which immediately conjures the Haitian Revolution.
Absolutely.
And so just the fact that they added that to a cowboy game.
Yeah.
Again, it's 1899, a little bit past. But you are a cowboy doing old Westy type things, gunfights, but suddenly you're in the Caribbean and you're working with a descendant of the Haitian Revolution, the spirit, right? Working against a General Foussard, who is working with Cornwall.
Yeah.
So you get this glimpse of, you know, U.S. capital expansion into the Caribbean.
That's right. Yeah. It's also, I think, a good way to think about. I mean, there's this old passage from the Talmud. This is the time in our podcast I usually talk about the Talmud. So there's this passage in the Talmud where this rabbi says, a man doesn't speak for no reason, right? And I think we can think about that in the context of the game. It's not like the game makers were like, I don't know, throw an island in there.
Yeah.
Like they probably did this quite intentionally.
Yes.
And so it does seem like a real kind of gap or, if you want to use
missed opportunity.
or a fancy academic word like a lacuna in Olson's presentation is this sort of dismissal of the Guarma chapter.
Yeah, I would,
so
if I was the editor, I think for second edition, which I hope enough people read it.
Yeah,
because
me too.
The book this is the type of book that you could give as a gift for anyone that plays Red Dead, but they don't really read history.
Yeah, and they don't engage with it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's definitely all the students in both classes
have
very much reacting to it, and so to me this is an important book because it bridges these two genres.
Absolutely,
but it makes people think about that. That late 19th century, and again, I've been reading through the Yellow Dig, but also from the classroom discussions, and there are all these episodes. And again, for me, I take it for granted, but they've never heard of much of this stuff. They've never heard of the history of the railroad, right?
That's right.
They haven't heard of a lot of the racial politics, end of slavery. Yeah. Remember, we had the question about sharecropping.
Exactly.
And I'm just like, wow, I think I even remember learning that in high school, but maybe they don't teach it anymore. Maybe, it's...
People, I think, miss it, or different high schools do different things. But.
And so the book is... we really enjoyed the book, but this is sort of like, Guarma, and literally a year before the events in the game, it's the Spanish-American War.
That's right, yeah. And you can even see this in newspapers in the game are talking about it as a big, current event thing. This is really interesting, and we hope that all of you are enjoying our texts. This week is a little odd with the game stuff, just in the sense of, we kind of put this together. We really wanted to make sure everyone got a look at the suits and the when piece. But the Chalmers, if you read that too, you notice that is not particularly advanced or difficult. In fact, that is a book kind of like the Tor Olson book, which is Chalmers, who sometimes, some of his stuff is on notoriously some of the most complex stuff, right? Chalmers has written a great deal in philosophy of mind, and a lot of his focus is developing a particular account of what they call the hard problem of consciousness. So if you read the Conscious Mind, for example, it is dense and difficult to read and stuff. And what is it called? Reality Plus, I think, is the name from the chapters we got. It is breezy and accessible and fun and engaging, and has nice little not animations, illustrations and stuff. So it's not exactly a fitting, quote unquote grad level reading, but it does give a kind of additional layer and dimension of stuff to put on top of this, because it's really thinking, when I engage in a virtual world in some way, does that have value or significance? So it really ties into the first chapters we read, and then do virtual lives, do non-player characters, is there value there? Are we doing something wrong by taking them? That bridges really easily to next week. So we hope that, now that we're almost in some sense kind of through the ethics part of the course, and this last few weeks are, we are doing ethics stuff, but it's really more focused on thinking about games and kind of agency too. And I think that's a good lead in. So if you think about the suits, if you looked at the very end of the suits piece, which the book, by the way, is called The Grasshopper. And I think our scan has the front matter, but it's really fun. It's a dialogue between a fictional, the old story of the grasshopper and the ant. The grasshopper is just hanging out playing all summer, and the ant's working hard and storing up food. And then as the fall hits and it's getting colder, the grasshopper doesn't have any food, and so he dies, and the ants still survive. And it's kind of this old fable of industriousness, right, and hard work and storing things by, and don't fritter away your time and stuff. And Suits takes that and just kind of reverses it. And the entire thing is really about what is the importance of something like leisure and play in our lives, and to think about this from a kind of musical perspective. you've all heard the classic "working for the weekend" kind of song, right?
Yeah.
But you can think about this as like, some people work to live and other people live to work, and what is that attitude, right? And what Suits is really trying to do is suggest that a deeply human thing we do is play, it is leisure, and games are one form of that. And so the whole book is this dialogue and extended work on thinking about the nature of games and play, and then possible objections to it. But I want to start with his longer definition, and then we'll do his portable one, since the portable one is in when. This is at the very last page of your Suits chapter. To play a game is to attempt to achieve a specific state of affairs, what he calls the pre-illusory goal, using only means permitted by rules, or what he calls illusory means, where the rules prohibit use of more efficient in favor of less efficient means. These are what he calls the constitutive rules. And where the rules are accepted just because they make possible such activity. That is the illusory attitude that you take. I also offer the following simpler and, so to speak, more portable version of the above. Playing a game is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. I think it's a good way to think about the nature of games, right? When I think about, if I want to if I'm running a marathon, I'm running to a particular point, I could, of course, just get in a car and drive there or something, and that would get me there quicker. Maybe I'd beat everybody, quote unquote, but I'm not trying to do the most efficient thing, right? The point is in the play almost. Or you think about, what was the example he gives, like the pole vaulting example? Well, you could just walk over. You don't need to use the pole vault and run and jump. But the point is to do that, right? And so it isn't just going to a place or going to a location. It is part of the point of doing the game is you are intentionally not doing it in the most efficient way possible, whatever your task.
Yeah, I always think of the hurdles. Like, why don't you just run around the hurdles?
Yeah, or just run right through them,
right.
or something.
Just kick them over.
Yeah, but of course that's not the point. It misses the point in a certain way.
And it's interesting too because it seems like a very human. We've been talking about this with animals. Like,
yes,
we know animals play. So like dolphins play.
That's right.
Apes play.
Yeah.
But do they do games where they self-consciously create a gauntlet to go through in the act of playing, which makes things more difficult.
That's right. Yeah.
And then it works on a more an intellectual skill of overpowering or I guess getting to know and mastering the rules of it. So I guess the checkers and chess. Checkers are pretty easy.
Yeah.
But chess is one of those games that it takes a while to really figure it out. And if you're playing against someone that is amazing, they will crush you every time.
It's also a good example of how understanding the conditions of something allow for a certain kind of knowledge, right? And you've probably experienced this in video games or other things you're particularly good at. If you have someone come in that doesn't know about it and they start doing stuff and you can kind of see, I see where this is going to go, right? Whatever. So I always think of this example of, if I'm watching, two chess grandmasters and one does a move and another person who's a chess grandmaster leans over and they're like, oh man, that's checkmate in 7 moves. I don't see anything on the board. Like that means nothing to me. But to them, it clearly does mean something, right? Because they're familiar with it. Or if you think about a really simple game, like tic-tac-toe is such a simple game that once you understand it, you can always end it in a draw. You can always make it so that you're blocking someone so that they never their plan never comes to fruition if you know what you're doing. Whereas something like chess is much, much more complex, right? And it also is a funny way to think about sometimes people play games within games or they modify games to suit themselves. So, a common thing in Dungeons and Dragons is people will have what they call usually session 1 or session 0. And they all get together and basically say, okay, here are the house rules. What do we think will be acceptable in the campaign and not? Do we want to modify anything from the player's handbook or not, right? Or if you play, a card game like Magic the Gathering or even like Monopoly or Uno, right? There's always sometimes like house rules. Each person or group has a different set of things they're doing. Or, the example that I gave Dan when we were talking about this earlier this week was, it just reminds me of this time when, Larry Bird decided he was going to play a game by only shooting with his left hand, which was his offhand. It's like the game itself isn't hard enough. I have to add an extra layer. I certainly don't have to do that, but he did it clearly because it was like a way to challenge himself. So it's always interesting to think about the games as these really artificial things where we intentionally bind ourselves and then have to sort of live with sort of the artificial binding that we have. So I really liked the discussion of sort of the nature of games. I hope you enjoyed it too, and I hope it just made you think about not only Red Dead Redemption 2, but other games you've experienced. I mean, some of you, of course, maybe are not game people and you just really like history or philosophy, but I would guess many of you really like games if you did a Red Dead Redemption class. And so I hope that this discussion of games this week and the next is really interesting for you to ponder and think about. Moving to the when I think is also really interesting. And his whole, what we read was the first chapter of a book that he wrote that's called Games, Agency as Art. And it's really him thinking about like what he thinks is interesting about the games as an aesthetic kind of object, right? As an art object or giving rise to certain kinds of experiences, is that, as he says, the sort of artistic medium of games is agency. They're a way to model agency, right? I particularly liked his discussion of different kinds of games. There was stuff I had never heard of. So I liked, like, for example, the concept of like what he called stupid games, where the point is kind of to get it wrong. So, the game of telephone. If I'm, the whole point of playing telephone is people are going to mess it up. That way, the person who says it at the end says something very different than the person that said at the beginning, and everybody laughs or something, right? If you just actually did that effectively, it would not be very fun. Or Twister, or I really liked the bag over the head game he talked about, where everybody gets together in a small circle or whatever, a small place, and has a bag over their head, and then when you touch someone, you've kind of tagged them. They have to take the bag off and leave. And then part of the fun is everyone is trying to be silent after they've been put out of the game to watch the person who's the last person who's stumbling around trying to find somebody, and they don't realize they've won the game yet, right? So it's interesting to think about a whole category of games where kind of the point is to play them badly or ineffectively.
Or to lose.
Or to lose, exactly. That's exactly right, yeah.
Which is a weird, again, it's, I think, like, if we're hunters and gatherers, you're hardly like, hey, let's play a game where we don't get the hunt right.
That's right.
Let's play a game where we don't get the berries right.
That's right.
And it's, so those types of games in themselves are simulations of, let's experience losing and enjoy it.
It's not life or death. Exactly.
Yeah. And again, it's, like, is there a group of dolphins out there where they play games where, hey, let's pretend we're going to lose at catching the fish? Is there even thought capable of doing that? Or is that just a purely sort of neurotic human thing that, like, we're going to play a game and whoever loses the most wins?
That's right. Yeah. I think that this way of thinking about games is also a good counter to a really common, increasingly common attitude, which is just the idea that, like, everything is better if it's more efficient, and efficiency is the point of everything of all life. And games are almost by definition refutations of something like that, right? So the idea of games sort of modeling agency is, if you think about Red Dead Redemption, if you think about Super Mario Brothers or Fallout 4, or any kind of game you want to think about, you're kind of stepping in, and you're kind of stepping in to inhabit a different kind of agency than you usually do, right? I can't throw fireballs like Mario. I can't destroy bricks with my head the way Mario can or whatever. I also can't go into slow-mo time and shoot people the way that Arthur can, right, in Red Dead Redemption. I can't do any of those things. I can't access power armor and drink radiated water. I mean, I could, but it would go much worse for me, right, than the protagonist of Fallout 4. Or even other kinds of games that are really fantastical. I will never drive a starship or control world-spanning civilization or something, right? And so games let you inhabit a different kind of agency. And Wen's point, as you see when you work through the book, is he thinks that it just lets us really not only think about our own agency and different forms of agency. I mean, as we get older, often our agency decreases. We depend on others for more and more things. And for people, right, who, if I have a serious sort of, brain injury, I'm going to depend on a lot of people. My agency is going to be altered a little bit, right? So it's a way of thinking about, like, our conditions of agency and modeling, like, what might the world be like? What can we know about how we navigate the world by playing games, by doing something like that? The other thing I really liked in When is at the end. I mean, there's a bunch of interesting stuff to talk about there. I like, for example, the discussion of, like, striving play, where the point is to try hard, but you also the point isn't exactly to win, right? So he gives the example of like playing racquetball with his wife, and they're all both trying hard because they're trying to beat each other. But if someone came in and said, "Hey, I'm going to offer you free racquetball lessons so you can get way better," what he says is, "Well, that would kind of mess up the whole point. I would get way better, and then I would beat her every time, and then we wouldn't have fun, and then this activity that we're kind of taking joy in together would no longer be useful." So he's almost like intentionally not trying to be as good as he can overall, but during the game, they're striving, right? They're trying to play. So that I think is really interesting. But I think the idea of moral clarity is really relevant for us, right? Because, part of what I hope you took from all of the stuff we've read about ethics and your interaction with the game, I mean, Arthur, I think, is intended to model a kind of morally complex character. But at the same time, the game, in a certain way, has a relatively simple, in a certain way, again, moral system, right? Some actions give you positive honor. Some actions negate your honor. You're trying to overall kind of do more actions that do positive than negative, or maybe not, depending on if you want to do a low honor or high honor playthrough. But, it all treats it as if it's easily commensurable, right? Judged by the same standard, that it all makes sense. So that way, if you, rob a train, well, you say hi to enough people in Saint Denis, and that balances it out. Whereas we usually wouldn't think those things are really doing the same thing, or they have different kind of gravity or something. So games give us a kind of illusion of a moral clarity that we just often don't find in our lives. And that's kind of the point of thinking about the end of our ethical theory stuff, about particularism, or even the forms of it like virtue theory or feminist ethics, which is just the idea that the moral maze that we inhabit is quite complicated. And, even if there is like a right answer to lots of these moral questions, which, I kind of think there is often, but it's really hard to figure out, and it's really complicated, and it's not easy. And if you just think, "Oh, I got it, I know all the right stuff," like you're probably fooling yourself a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really helpful way to think about the game and model it, and think about just our relationship to it and relationship to moral concepts in real life too. So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about the documentary that we
so the documentary,
we can send that around too. We'll email maybe everybody.
Maybe we can send the link.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's on YouTube, just the video.
I think it is.
Or if it's actively, we'll figure that out. But so there's a documentary. It's about 20 minutes long.
Minutes, yeah.
And it focuses on non-playing characters in the game. I want to say there's a carpenter, the Saint Denis docks. There's a person cleaning clothes in Saint Denis.
That's right.
I think
Laundress.
there's
stable hand.
There's a stable hand. I think in is that Valentine?
I think I think it's in Valentine. And there's a street sweeper that I think is in
Northern Industrial Annesburg.
Yeah.
And what the sort of film, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
The film follows them and kind of is pondering their existence, because what they did was they just filmed them for hours.
Yeah.
And so
over days in
the game. So there's at one point they do time lapse of the guy doing the carpentry.
That's right.
And he just stays at the docks hitting these spots multiple times.
That's right.
And then he just hangs out and smokes a cigarette all night.
That's
but
right.
It's one cigarette.
One cigarette, yeah.
The stable hand eventually goes and gets something to eat.
That's right, yeah. But he eats exactly 2 bites most of the time.
Yeah, he goes to the bar and drinks a couple sips of beer, but then he gets sick.
Staggering drunk.
Yeah, outside. And then he just stands there all night. Waiting for the next day to start. And it's if you've seen Westworld,
it's
exactly what you would expect. Like this, these are the real lives of these characters that are, it was one student said, it's like purgatory.
It is. They're
caught in this,
this
loop of existence, which is really. Yeah, I think it makes you rethink as you're going through the game. Both, on the one hand, you could make the argument of, I can't believe that's all they do. But on the other hand, it's, how long it took someone to program, even just the carpenter going around at the same places, and it's all synchronized. And
so it's at once kind of amazing at how complex the game is. And also, you kind of realize, things have there's like a surface level of complexity that once we get down a little deeper is maybe not there a little bit. But again, thinking about how I always, I sometimes think and joke, and you can go onto the Red Dead Redemption subreddit and you will see posts like every 2 weeks about this, where someone will say, basically, Red Dead Redemption is the best game I've ever played. It like ruins other games for me.
Yeah.
I was talking with Dan. I've been playing Far Cry New Dawn a little bit as well, and that's also kind of open world-ish. And it's kind of post-apocalyptic and stuff, but
you did start playing.
I started playing that. Yeah,
Oh,
I thought
it's so good.
Yeah, it's very good. But I've been playing so much Red Dead Redemption that I go over to that and I'm like, this is pretty surface level. It's again very good, but the NPCs, the whole depth of the world is at a much shallower level, which is fine, right? Because it's not trying to do the same thing. And even with that, you start looking a little further under the hood in the Red Dead Redemption game, and it's just like, okay, the stuff that is really quite well modeled and complex in certain ways, falls apart if you just sit there and watch it like you're not really meant to over the course of days or something. So, yeah. And it also, I think, it led to a pretty rich discussion in our on-campus course about, how sometimes like just doing the day-to-day things that you have to do just gets to feeling monotonous, and you get to kind of feeling like, one student today said, I will have a customer and it's almost like I feel like I've met this person before, because their mannerisms are so similar. They're saying the same kind of things. And it's just almost like, is this real life? Like, is there more to it? Is this all it is? And so I think there's some really interesting.
Can I respawn? It had fast travels.
That's right. Else. That's right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I thought so when you look at the film, with the looping sort of NPCs, it's again unintentional.
Mm-hmm.
It would be amazing if there's notes that you could find.
Yeah.
But it's almost like that is the metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
So you're watching it and critiquing it.
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe they didn't add in double that.
Which
then someone would complain about that.
Exactly.
It's not enough.
Exactly.
You don't have a week's long worth of original activity that this stable hand is going to be doing. But the act itself becomes a weird critique of everyday existence.
Yep. Labor conditions, mundane experience.
I thought that was the ricocheting of the conversation really took it to those different places.
Yes.
Gosh, my life is just like that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
The other part too, I think we looked at this earlier in the week, and it's a part. I think it kind of deviates from some of the stuff we're talking about, but it's really more of a discussion of the aesthetics of the game.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's the language of Dutch.
Yes,
So we watched earlier in the week in class, and this is something that you can type into YouTube. The first one here, just to get a sample. If you haven't seen the HBO or Max, I guess it's called now, series Deadwood. But if you typed into YouTube, Deadwood, Al and Seth are making plans. And it's about a 3-minute clip that gives an illustration of the way the show played with language.
Yeah.
Where it has this like strange Shakespearean element to it.
Yeah.
And Dutch is modeled off that. Yeah. Where how many times you've seen Dutch, and especially when he goes into his BSing.
Yeah.
When he's scamming someone.
Yeah.
A part of his delaying and running the clock.
Yeah.
Is rooted in this Deadwood series. And so you get a good glimpse of it in this scene. But the other little clip to watch it's just someone's video. It's just another YouTube video, but it's called Dialogue in Deadwood: The Mechanics of Delay.
Yeah,
and this person,
I was very impressed with that.
This person goes through sort of the writing aspect, and I think it's useful too as you're writing your own papers to think about how you're structuring your sentences. Being conscious of paragraphs. Within the paragraph, you have the rhythm of the sentence.
Yep.
A good thing to do as you're writing, and this is it's hard to do at first, and eventually, like, you stop caring. But a good thing to do is, when you have a draft, sit there and read it out loud to yourself.
Yeah.
Because you'll hear, oh, I've used that word a bunch of times.
That's right.
Or your breath is going to be like, wow, I keep having the same rhythm of the sentence. Maybe I need to change that.
Yeah, vary it a little bit.
Or, and I find this in my own work.
Yeah.
I say something, and then 3 paragraphs later, I'm saying the same thing, but in a different way. And I'm like, wait, I've already said that.
Yeah.
And you should do this, but this video dialogue in Deadwood, the mechanics of delay,
that's great.
really works at this language that is going through Deadwood, but also, really is Dutch.
It is, it's Dutch to a T.
Yeah, Dutch sort of pontificating.
That's right.
And, obviously, I think from our perspective in the game, you're Arthur, right? He doesn't read books.
It's a little simpler.
Yeah. But that's...
Although you read his journal, and that's a little...
I know, you're just like, wow, you're an English major.
In a certain way, that's right. Yeah.
And you just happen to be an outlaw.
That's right.
Which, I mean, if you're an English major, there's, a potential job.
That's right.
Opportunities. You could be an outlaw. But, yeah, so I think, again, it's as we're moving towards the end here and thinking about aesthetics, agency.
The nature of games. And then the intersection of kind of, in philosophy, one of the big sort of 3 areas, right, is metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology, or sometimes people just say value theory, and that's really split between like ethics or moral theory and aesthetics, right? So there are aesthetic values of like beauty and elegance of games or of gameplay or whatever, and our next week we'll kind of bridge those 2 things and think about like what is the intersection of the morality of depictions or certain kinds of agency in games. So, it's a perfect kind of. Hopefully, you're bringing this all together in kind of a, a nice soup or stew or something in your experience. So,
all right. So that's it for this week.
That's all we got.
We'll talk to you in 1 week.
That's right. Have a great day.